My name is Lucia Nevis. I'm 33 years old, and I have a security clearance higher than my own father, a 3-star general. He doesn't know that. 3 weeks ago, at a strategy briefing inside MacDill Air Force Base, in front of 200 officers, he pointed at me and said one thing that rearranged everything. A Navy SEAL colonel had just stood up asking for a classified operator. I answered. And my father, General Arthur Nevis, said, "Sit down, Lucia. You're 0." The room laughed. I didn't. Because the colonel wasn't looking at my father anymore. He was looking at me, and his face had gone white. He'd just recognized the operator he'd flown across the world to find. What nobody in that room knew was that the daughter my father called a filing clerk had a call sign whispered in 3 war zones. If you've ever been made small by the people who should have been proud, stay with me. Ghost 13 was about to answer. The first time I understood what my father thought of me, I was 9, and he was standing in the kitchen with a colleague named Bill Rourke, holding a glass of scotch. Bill asked what I wanted to be. I said, a pilot. My father laughed the way you laugh at a dog wearing a hat. He set his glass down on the counter and the ice clinked, and he said, "She'll be a nurse. Or she'll marry one of those Georgetown lawyers. Something with a future." He didn't say it to hurt me. That was the part one never got used to. He said it the way you read a weather report. My name is Lucia Nevis. My father is Lieutenant General Arthur Nevis, and for most of my life he told people I did office work. I want to be precise because precision is the only thing I have that he can't rewrite. When I graduated the Air Force Academy in the top 4% of my class, he did not come. He sent a card. The card had a picture of a lighthouse on it, and inside he'd written, "Proud of you. Call your mother." 11 years later, I still remember the lighthouse, and I still don't know what it was supposed to mean. By the time I was 28, I had a job I wasn't allowed to describe to anyone, including him. There's a level of clearance most people never hear the name of. I had it. There's a call sign that 3 different war zones learned to say quietly. That was me. I'm not going to explain what I did with a rifle because I'm still not permitted to, and because the number would sit in your chest the way it sits in mine. What matters here is that my father never knew and I never told him, and the reason I never told him was the law, not fear. I want that on the record. It was the law. He filled the silence with a story he liked better. To his golf friends, to his sister in Ohio, to the neighbors, I was logistics. A desk. Paperwork in a climate-controlled building. Once, at a dinner, I heard him tell a retired colonel that I was backpacking through Europe, finding herself. I was not in Europe. I was in a place I can't name, lying in a bunk with my boots still on, and I'd have given a year of my life for a European problem. The dinner I keep coming back to was in the spring of 2019. A formal thing, mess dress, chandeliers, a hotel ballroom in Alexandria. I flew in for it because my mother asked me to. Halfway through the evening, my father cupped my elbow, steered me toward a cluster of generals, and put an empty glass in my hand. "Sweetheart," he said, smiling at them, not at me. "Top these off, would you? She's wonderful with the little things." I stood there in my dress uniform, ribbons he never asked about pinned over my heart, and I poured wine. I poured it steadily. My hand did not shake. I remember the smell of the wine gone warm and the sound of a chair leg dragging on marble behind me, and I remember thinking, not one of these men knows they're being served by someone who could end this room's worst nightmare. I refilled 6 glasses and said thank you when they thanked me. That's the thing about learning to swallow it. You get good enough that it stops looking like swallowing. It starts to look like grace. The message came later, and it's the one I need you to hold on to, because it comes back. It was October. I was in a hospital bed at Lansdale with hardware in my left leg and a concussion that made the ceiling tilt when I turned my head. I don't get to tell you how I got hurt. I can tell you I was on my back, that a nurse had just left, and that my phone lit up on the tray table. A text from my father. It said, "Time to grow out of this phase, Lucia. Come home. Do something a family can be proud of." He didn't know where I was. He didn't know what I'd done 4 days earlier or who was alive because of it. He thought I was being difficult in an office somewhere. I read it twice. Then I turned the phone face down on the tray and watched the ceiling tilt until it stopped. I didn't answer for 6 days. When I did, I wrote, "Understood." Love you. Because that was easier than the truth, and because the truth was still classified. I told myself we lived in different worlds, and the walls between them would hold.
I was wrong about that.
2 weeks later, an encrypted order came through. A joint strategy briefing at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. Attendance mandatory. 200 officers. And at the top of the roster, listed as the keynote speaker, was the name Lieutenant General Arthur Nevis. The auditorium at MacDill held the cold of a room built for machines, not people. I found my seat in the 4th row from the back, 3rd from the aisle, and set my folder square on my knee. Around me, colonels and lieutenant colonels murmured about coffee and connecting flights. I did not murmur. I had learned a long time ago that the quietest person in a room is often the one holding the most. On the stage, my father adjusted the microphone with 2 fingers, the way he adjusted everything, precisely, and as if the object had disappointed him. The screen behind him read Strategic Posture Briefing in block letters. He did not look for me in the crowd. He never had. For 90 minutes, he spoke about theater readiness. I watched the back of his hand, the wedding ring he still wore, the small tremor in his thumb. He thought no one noticed. Then the floor opened for operational requests, and a man in the 2nd row stood up. He was broad through the shoulders in the way that has nothing to do with the gym. Navy service dress, trident on his chest, silver eagle at his collar. He did not use notes. "Colonel Marcus Hale," he said. "I have a time-sensitive requirement. I need a Tier 1 asset with sniper qualification and compartmented clearance for a joint recovery operation. Wheels up window is narrow. I'm asking if that person is in this building." A pause moved through the room. 200 people, and nobody wants to be the one to raise a hand into a silence like that. I stood up. I did it the correct way, the only way I knew, the way the regulation reads.
Colonel I.
Major Lucia Nevis. I may be able to meet that requirement, pending verification. My father's laugh came before I finished the sentence. It was not a private laugh. He leaned into the microphone so the whole auditorium could share it. "Sit down, Lucia."
A beat.
"She's a 0. He shook his head at the stage, at the audience, at the joke of me. "My daughter pushes paper. Logistics desk. Sit down before you embarrass yourself in front of these people." Somewhere to my left, a captain snorted. 2 rows up, someone smiled into his coffee cup. Heat climbed the back of my neck, and I let it. I have taken rounds through a plate carrier and kept breathing through the count. I could stand through a laugh. But I noticed that Colonel Hale was not laughing. He had gone very still. He was looking at me the way you look at a face you know from a photograph, but not from life. Then he looked down at the folder in his hand, a thin one, red border, the kind that does not leave a certain kind of room, and he flipped it open and read something twice. I watched his lips move over a word. His jaw set. He looked back up. Not at my father. At me. Major Nevis. His voice had dropped all of its ceremony. It was the flat, careful voice men use when the stakes have quietly changed. "I'm going to ask you a direct question. I need you to answer it exactly." The room, which had been settling back into its coffee, went taut again. "Are you Ghost 13? I have kept that name inside my mouth for 5 years. I have not said it to my mother. I did not say it to the surgeon at Landstuhl who asked me, at 2 in the morning, what I did for a living. There is a compartment in me where that name lives, and the door on it is heavy, and I built the hinges myself. I did not open the door. I said the only thing I could say. Colonel, that's not a question I can answer in this room." Which is, of course, its own answer. Hale's shoulders dropped an inch, the way a man's shoulders drop when the thing he was afraid to hope for turns out to be standing 4 rows from the back. His eyes did something then that I will not forget. They filled briefly, and he blinked it down, and I understood that whatever he thought he owed Ghost 13, it was not small, and it was not old debt he'd made peace with. It was a bill he'd been carrying every day since a place he hadn't named yet. Someday I would make him name it. Not today. On the stage, my father was still smiling, but the smile had begun to come apart at the edges, the way ice does before you hear it. He leaned back into the mic. "Colonel, I appreciate the theater, but let's not waste the room's time. My daughter is an administrative officer." He said administrative the way another man might say counterfeit. Whatever list you're reading, you've got a coincidence of last names. It happens. Hale did not sit down. He reached into his breast pocket and drew out a card. Matte, no logo, a chip and a magnetic stripe, and nothing a civilian would recognize. He crossed to the security officer standing by the stage stairs and held it against the tablet in the man's hands. I heard the small electronic tone from the back of the room. I heard the captain beside me stop breathing. Hale read the screen. Then he turned, and he addressed my father by rank, in front of 200 officers, in a voice built to carry. Sir. A pause you could have driven a truck through. She holds Yankee White. He let the tablet's light fall across his face. Higher than yours, General. A staff sergeant near the third row stood without being asked. She had a security tablet cradled against her chest, the kind with the red band along the case that meant it never left the building. She looked at Hale, then at me, then at the general at the podium.
Colonel, she said.
I can verify. I have SCI clearance and biometric access on this device. Hale nodded once. Do it. She walked the aisle toward me. Her boots were the only sound. 200 officers, and I could hear the little squeak her left heel made on the polished floor with every step. She stopped in front of me and turned the tablet so the reader faced up. Ma'am, may I have your thumb? I gave it to her. The glass was cool. It read for maybe 2 seconds, a lifetime when a whole room is holding its breath, and then it chimed, soft, almost polite, and a green bar slid across the screen. She read what came up.
Her posture changed.
Not a salute, nothing that dramatic. Her chin just came up half an inch, the way people straighten when they realize the person in front of them is not who the room told them they were. Confirmed, she said, loud enough to carry. Major Lucia Nevis. Ghost 13. Clearance is active and current. Nobody laughed now. I had spent 11 years learning how to disappear inside a briefing. Sit in the middle. Answer nothing you don't have to. Let them think what they need to think. I was very good at it. I had never once, in this building or any other, felt the temperature of a room turn toward me all at the same time. It is a physical thing, like standing up too fast. My father had not moved from the podium. His hand was still on the wooden lip of it, the way he always stood when he owned a room, and he did not own this one anymore. His face had gone the color of the paper in the folder in front of him. He was looking at me the way you look at a word you have said your whole life, and just discovered you'd been pronouncing wrong. Hale stepped down off the small stage. He didn't hurry. He walked to the center aisle and turned so he was speaking to the room, not to me and not to the general. I'm not clear to tell you what Ghost 13 has done, he said. Most of it will never have a name. But I can tell you one thing because I was there, and I'm still breathing. He paused. 6 years ago, my team was pinned on a ridge we should not have walked onto. 8 of us. We had minutes. One shooter held that ridge alone and kept the line open until we got out. All 8 of us came home from Afghanistan.
He looked at me then.
I never knew who it was. I've been trying to buy that person a drink for 6 years. A dry, tired half-smile. Turns out I've been in the same building as her twice and never knew her name. Someone in the second row breathed out through their teeth. A colonel I didn't know put his hand flat on the table in front of him, like he needed to feel something solid. And the whispering started. Not loud. It never is, with people trained to keep their faces still. It moved along the rows the way wind moves through dry grass, a lean toward a neighbor, a murmur behind a hand, and always a glance toward the podium. Toward my father. I heard my own name, and I heard his rank, in the same low sentence, over, and I understood exactly what those sentences were. He told everyone she did logistics. He didn't know. For years, he stood in rooms like this one, and lied about his own daughter to men who could have known better, and now those men were doing the math out loud, and the answer kept coming up the same. Every dinner he'd told them I was backpacking through Europe. Every time he'd said office work with that little downward flick of his mouth. All of it was in the room now, and it had nowhere to go but back onto him. I did not smile. I want to be honest about that, because I had imagined this moment in 100 ugly shapes over the years, and in all of them I was smiling. I wasn't. There was no room in my chest for it. I just stood up straight. fully straight, shoulders squared, for the first time in that man's presence in 33 years. That was all. It was enough. My father opened his mouth. Lucia. He hadn't used my name in that voice since I was a child. I never found out what he meant to say next, because that was when I heard it, the low, chopping thud coming up through the floor, through the soles of my boots, growing.
Dramatized.
Close. Getting closer. Then the double doors at the back of the auditorium banged open, and a young airman leaned in, out of breath. Colonel Hale. Birds on the pad. They're spinning up. Hale's whole manner changed in a half-second. The storyteller was gone. He looked at me, and there was nothing warm in it anymore. Only work.
Hostages in Yemen, he said.
We're out of time. Get on the plane. The rotor noise ate every word until Hale handed me a headset. I pulled it on. The cabin smelled of hydraulic fluid and old coffee, and someone had scrawled a name in marker on the bulkhead near my knee, half worn away. You don't remember me, Hale said. Not a question. I never saw your faces. I checked the seal on my case without looking down. That was the point. He leaned back. Kandahar province. 6 years ago. A ridge line above a dry wash. 8 of us pinned in a compound at dawn. I let the number sit.
8.
I had counted them myself. Through glass, one at a time. I held that ridge, I said. You held it for 9 hours. I remembered the heat first, not the fear. The way the stock burned against my cheek by noon, and how I stopped drinking water because moving my arm to the canteen meant losing the corner of the courtyard for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was a life. I had learned that math young. Here is the part nobody writes down. A shooter does not win a fight. A shooter makes a fight boring. You take the first man who breaks cover, and you take him clean, and then the others stop breaking cover. You become weather. You become a reason to stay behind a wall. I put 11 men behind walls that day, and I kept 11 others alive by making the walls seem safer than they were. There was a runner, Hale said quietly. My youngest. He froze in the open. Second squad still talks about the shot. 240 meters. Crosswind. I said it flat, the way you'd read a grocery list. He was between me and a doorway. I didn't take the man in the doorway. I took the one behind him. Hale was silent a moment. Through a 4-inch gap. 6 inches. It felt like 4. He almost smiled. Then he didn't. What he did not know, what I never told him, was where I went after. Landstuhl. Building 3. A shoulder that had come apart when the ridge finally gave out, and I'd gone off the rock backward into scree. They pinned it with titanium. I lay in a bed that smelled of iodine and floor wax, one arm in a sling, and my phone lit up on the tray table. It was from my father. I did not read it right away. I watched it glow and go dark. When I finally opened it, it said, "This is not a life. Come home before you throw it all away. Your mother is embarrassed." I set the phone face down on the tray. Outside my door, 2 men from Hale's team, though I did not know them as that yet, were being wheeled past to physical therapy. Alive. And my father, 3 time zones away, was ashamed of a daughter he thought filed paperwork. I never answered the text. I want that on the record. He sent it the same week the citation for that ridge went into a file he would never be allowed to read.
Neves.
Hale's voice pulled me back. You went quiet. I go quiet before work. You'll get used to it. I don't plan to work with you long enough to get used to anything. He meant it kindly. In our trade, that is affection. One up. You do this, you go home. I don't have a home to go to, I said, and it came out drier than I intended. He heard it anyway. He didn't fill the silence with something soft, which is how I knew I could trust him. He unrolled a laminated map across both our knees. Hostage. American contractor, taken 40 days ago. Held in a compound 11 clicks inside the coast. We've had eyes on it for 2 weeks. 1 window, 1 shot to move him before they rotate him inland where we can't reach. And you need someone who can hold a position alone, I said. Because if it goes loud, the team is gone, and I'm the last thing standing on a rooftop. I need Ghost 13, he said. I've needed her for 6 years. I just didn't know she was sitting 8 rows down from her own father getting called a 0. I looked at the name half erased on the bulkhead. I understood, then, that I would remember this cabin. That one day, years out, in a room with a flag and a slow clock, I would want this man to be the one standing next to me. I filed the thought and closed the drawer on it. There was work. The crew chief held up 2 fingers. 20 minutes. I checked the case again. Cleaned the glass I had already cleaned. My heart was slow. It always slowed before, never after. After is when it caught up with me, in showers, in parking lots, in the aisle of a grocery store at 2 in the morning. Then the co-pilot's voice cut across the net, tight in a way trained men only get when the ground is moved. Command to Ghost Element. Be advised. Package has relocated. Repeat, the target site is cold. Assets on site confirm the hostage was moved 4 hours ago. Hale's jaw set. He looked at the map, then at me. Every line we had drawn on that laminate was worthless. Hale keyed his mic, say again the grid. The pilot's voice came back thin, under the rotor noise. Compound sits 4 kilometers northeast of the last mark. 2 structures. Guards on the roof of the west one. I unrolled a fresh sheet of paper against my knee. Not the laminate. A blank page because everything we had briefed was a story about a place he was no longer in. I drew what the pilot gave me. A box. A second box. A road that ran between them like a seam. How many hours old is this? I asked. Drone caught the move at 0200. 4 hours. 4 hours. In 4 hours a man can be fed, questioned, or buried. I did not say that. I checked the seating of my scope and felt the cold of the metal come through my glove. We put down 1,100 meters out, behind a spine of rock the color of old bone. The air smelled of diesel and dust and something burnt I chose not to name. 6 of us. Hale took the assault element left. I went right, up the spine, alone the way I work, because a second body next to a rifle is a second silhouette. I found my position at a notch in the rock. I ranged the west roof. 940 meters. 2 guards, 1 seated, 1 walking a slow square. Wind came across my left cheek, light, maybe 4 miles an hour, gusting. I dialed it. I breathed. Then the plan came apart in my ear. Contact, Hale said flat. We are lit up. Torres is hit. Torres is hit, left leg, he's down in the open between the structures. I put my eye back to the glass. There he was, one of ours, dragging himself across that seam of road, and a guard leaning out of a second-floor window bringing a rifle down on him, like a man closing a door. Here is the part one have replayed 1,000 times. I took the window shooter.
Clean.
He folded, and in the half-second of pride that follows a good shot, I swung to the roof, and I rushed the second guard. I told myself the wind had held. It had not. My round went high and left and skipped off the parapet, and the man dropped behind cover, and now he was alive and he knew exactly where I was. That is the cost of certainty. I had believed my own legend for 1 breath, and it had almost bought a coffin. Ghost status, Hale said. Missed the roof. He's calling it in. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone with more time than I had. The guard came up again, this time with the muzzle swinging toward Torres, who was still in the open, still 10 meters of nothing from the wall. I did not rush. I let the rifle settle. I gave the wind back what I had stolen from it.
2 clicks right.
I waited for the gust to die, and in the little silence between gusts, I broke the shot. He went down and did not come up. Move Torres now, I said. They pulled him behind the east structure. I held the roof, held the road, held the doorway I now knew the hostage was behind, because a man does not put 2 shooters on a roof to guard an empty room. The door opened. A guard first, using the hostage as a wall, the way frightened men do. He had an arm across the man's throat and a pistol to his ear, and he was screaming something at Hale's element in a language I had only enough of to know it was a threat. I had a sliver. From my angle, past the doorframe, maybe 4 inches of the guard's head that the hostage did not cover. 940 meters. Gusting wind. A living man's skull an inch from the one I needed to end. Ghost. Hale's voice low now, not an order. A question. Your call. I have taken harder shots. I have never taken one where being right and being wrong looked so alike right up until the trigger. I exhaled halfway and stopped. The sight picture went still, stiller than the world has any right to be. There is a place at the bottom of a breath where my heart beats in the gaps, and I can shoot between the beats. I found it. The rifle spoke. The 4 inches of the guard disappeared, and the hostage dropped straight down because the arm holding him had stopped holding anything. Hostage secure, someone called. Hostage is up, he's walking. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because people expect a swell of music here. What I felt was my own pulse in my teeth and a sourness in the back of my throat and the specific loneliness of a place where the only thing between 8 men and the dark had been my willingness to miss. We carried Torres to the bird. His leg was a mess, but it was a leg he would keep. On the flight out, he grabbed my wrist and would not let go for a long time and said nothing, which was the right amount of words. Hale sat across from me, blood on his sleeve that was not his.
He looked at me for a while.
You missed the roof, he said. I did. And then you didn't miss anything for the rest of the night. He nodded once, slow. That's the job. I looked out at the dark and let the shaking stay in my hands where no one could see it under the gloves. That is the thing about my work that my father would never understand. I did not want him to be proud of it. I only wanted him to stop pretending it was nothing. Pride was never what I needed. I needed him to look at the cost and not call it a filing cabinet. We landed at MacDill 60 hours later. A staff sergeant met me on the tarmac with a face he could not arrange into anything good. Major Nevis, he said. You should know before you hear it in the hallway. Your father's been down in records since yesterday. He's trying to make Captain Reyes open your sealed file. The sergeant who told me didn't wait for a reaction. I gave him none. I set my go bag down on the tile, still stiff with Yemen dust, and I walked to Building 12 myself. I didn't run. Running is for people who don't already know how a thing ends. What happened in records I got later in pieces from Captain Reyes, and I'll give it to you the way she gave it to me because I've turned it over so many nights it feels like I was standing in the corner watching. My father had been there since 0900. He wore his service dress, 3 stars catching the fluorescent light, and he stood at the counter the way he stood at every counter for 40 years, like the person behind it was already saying yes. Captain, he said, pull the mission file. Major Nevis. I'm her father. Reyes is 38. She keeps a photo of 2 boys taped inside her desk drawer and a laminated card of the federal statutes taped outside it. She looked at the card longer than she looked at him. Sir, I can't do that. You can. You have the terminal right there. I have the terminal. I don't have the authority. And neither do you. She kept her hands flat on the counter. That file is Yankee white compartmented. Accessing it without the billet isn't a favor. It's a felony. He smiled. I know that smile. It's the one before the temperature drops. I've been in this Air Force since before you could read, Captain. I know what a felony is. I'm asking you to let a father see whether his own daughter is alive. That was the part that worked on him, I think. Not the lie, the belief in it. Somewhere in his head, he'd rewritten the whole afternoon so that he was the wounded one. Reyes didn't move. You saw her at the briefing yesterday, sir. She's alive. That's all the clearance you have. The overhead vent ticked. A printer somewhere finished a job and went quiet. He leaned in, and his voice dropped to the register menus when they've decided to be reasonable one last time. You understand who I am. You understand a general remembers who is helpful to him. A pause. And who wasn't? I do understand, sir. She reached under the counter. He must have thought she was reaching for the keyboard. She wasn't. She set a single sheet of paper on the counter between them, the access request form. If you'd like to make the request formally, I'll log it. Every attempt to view a compartmented file is logged, sir. The one from yesterday afternoon. The one right now. They're already logged. She slid a pen across the laminate. I'll need your signature to log this one properly. So the record's complete.
I've thought a lot about that pen.
About the specific cruelty of a good person offering you the paperwork for your own downfall and meaning nothing cruel by it at all. He looked at the form. He looked at her hands, steady, at the card taped to the drawer, At the two-boy photo, he couldn't see, but that was there. And for the first time in the story of my life, my father's rank did nothing. It sat on his shoulders like costume jewelry. He'd walked it into a room where the only thing that mattered was a rule, and the rule didn't care that he was tired, or humiliated, or 62, or somebody's father. "This is my daughter," he said. Quieter now, almost to himself. "Yes, sir," Rhea said. "It is. And she outranks both of us on this file." He didn't sign. He straightened his jacket. I can see the small tug at the hem, the same tug I'd watched him give before every dinner where he'd introduce me as the girl who did office logistics. He turned and walked out without the file, without the form, without the pen. Rhea stood there a moment. Then she did the thing that broke my father's world, and she did it without any heat at all, the way you'd close a window before rain. She sat down. She opened a new report, and she typed what she'd witnessed: the date, the time, the 2 attempts, the offer, the refusal, the implied threat about who a general remembers, into a form that does not get thrown in a box, does not get lost in a garage, does not get quietly forgotten by a mother for 6 years. She told me later, she almost didn't. "He looked like a man at a funeral," she said. I felt sorry for him for about 4 seconds. Then she looked at the statute card, and she thought about her 2 boys, and about what it would cost them if she started deciding which felonies were sad enough to skip. "Sorry isn't a clearance, Major," she said. "Your father taught me that himself. Yesterday, in front of 200 people. I met her by the water fountain outside Building 12 an hour later. I didn't know yet that the report existed. I just wanted to thank her for not opening the file." She shook my hand once, firm, dry. Behind her the corridor smelled of floor wax and burnt coffee, and I remember thinking my whole family had been decided in a room that smelled like that. "Major," she said, "you should know I filed it. Everything he did in there. It's not personal. It's just true." I signed the acknowledgement she needed. All of it. My hand was steady, which surprised me, because part of me had spent 33 years bracing for the day the record would finally take my side, and now that it had, it only felt heavy. I thought about my mother's garage, about 6 years of silence I'd mistaken for peace, and I understood that a truth someone finally writes down is a different animal than a truth someone keeps. "Thank you," I said. It came out smaller than I meant. "Don't thank me," Rhea said. "I didn't do it for you. I didn't know the base commander read those flags every morning with his coffee. I didn't know that the next day, at 0730, a call would go out from the commanding general's office. Not to me. To my father. The call came at 0730, and by 0900 the whole base knew about it. I didn't hear it from a memo. I heard it from a staff sergeant in the DFAC line who went quiet when I set my tray down beside her, then said, very carefully, "Ma'am, is it true the 3-star tried to pull a Yankee white file?" She didn't look up from her eggs. That was how I knew Reyes's report had done its work. A base is a small town wearing a uniform. Nothing travels faster than a general's mistake. I ate. I didn't answer. The eggs were cold in the center. By noon I understood the shape of it. People I had never met were nodding at me in hallways, a slow, deliberate nod, the kind you give someone you've decided you were wrong about. A colonel from logistics stopped me outside Building 500 and shook my hand with both of his.
6 years, he said.
9 hours on that ridge. My nephew was on that team. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I said thank you and kept walking because if I stood still I would have to feel it, and I wasn't ready. What I felt instead was a strange, flat quiet. Not triumph.
I want to be honest about that.
I had spent 33 years imagining the day the room would turn, and now the room had turned, and it felt like standing in a house after the fire is out. You're glad it's over. You still can't sleep there. Here is the part nobody says out loud when the powerful fall. They don't fall all at once. They fall in small refusals. I saw one myself. My father's retirement ceremony, the one that had been in planning for 8 months, with a guest list and a program and a 2-star flying in from Ramstein to speak, was suddenly being reviewed for scheduling. That was the word an aide used near me at the coffee station, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. Reviewed for scheduling. I have been in this uniform long enough to translate. It means the men who are going to stand up and praise you have found reasons to be elsewhere. I didn't smile. I stirred my coffee and watched the little whirlpool spin down. He found me at 1540, outside the records annex, the same corridor where 4 days earlier he had tried to make Reyes break federal law on his behalf. He looked smaller. That's the only way I can put it. The uniform was the same. The 3 silver stars were the same. But something in the way he held his shoulders had come loose, like a tent with one stake pulled. He stopped 6 feet away. For a man who had spent my whole life narrating me to other people, he had nothing prepared. Lucia. Sir. The sir landed on him like a slap. His jaw worked.
You could have told me, he said.
All these years. You let me stand there, and he stopped. Started again. Do you know what this looks like? A general who doesn't know his own daughter's clearance. They're laughing at me, Lucia. Reyes filed a report. There's a report with my name on it. I let that sit in the air between us. A door opened somewhere down the hall and closed again. Someone had seen us and thought better of it. You told everyone I did office logistics, I said. My voice came out even. That surprised me. You told Uncle Bill I was backpacking through Europe. Last October, I was in Landstuhl Building 3, and you texted me to quit. I read it on a morphine drip. I never told you where I was because I couldn't. That's the law. That's not a grudge. That's the law. But you... I stopped because the next part was the true part. I had my clearance at 28. You had 5 years to wonder what a logistics clerk needed with that. You never once wondered. In 33 years, you never guessed I might be more than a disappointment. That wasn't classified. That was just easier. His mouth opened. What came out was the thing I had known was coming, the thing that had lived under every dinner of my childhood. I did it for the family, he said. For how it looks. A daughter with a gun in the mountains. How was I supposed to? People ask at the club, at church. They ask what your children do, and he heard himself. I watched him hear himself. His hand came up halfway and dropped. I did it for the family. You did it for the club, I said. Quietly. Not cruel. Just true. He didn't answer. A young airman rounded the corner, saw the stars, snapped a salute so hard his heels cracked on the tile, then saw my face, and I swear something crossed his eyes, because he'd heard the story too, and he held the salute a half-second longer looking at me instead of my father. Then he was gone. The sound of it hung there. My father had spent 40 years collecting salutes. He had never once looked like they cost him anything until that moment. I have to go, I said. I didn't. But I left him standing in the corridor, and I didn't look back, and I made it to my quarters before my hands started shaking, and I sat on the edge of the bed and let them. My phone buzzed at 19:02. My mother, Diane Nevis, did not call. In 33 years, she had let him do the calling, the deciding, the narrating. I almost let it ring out. There was a pause on the line before she spoke, and in that pause I heard her breathe in twice, like a woman standing at the edge of a thing she has circled for years. I answered. Lucia. Her voice was low, like someone speaking with a hand cupped around the phone. Come here. Come to the house. There's something I've kept from your father for years. The drive to Alexandria took 4 hours. I don't remember most of it. I remember the last mile, the maple in the front yard, the porch light my father always left off to save the bulb. It was on. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She had lost weight. Her cardigan was buttoned wrong, one gap too high, and she didn't fix it when she saw me looking. He's at the base, she said. The retirement committee. He'll be gone until 4. The house smelled the way it always had. Lemon polish. Cold coffee. She led me past the good room we were never allowed to sit in and up the stairs, and her hand shook on the rail. At the top she stopped outside the sewing room, the one door I'd never once seen open in 33 years. I need you to not say anything until I finish, she said. If you say anything, I'll stop. She unlocked it with a key from her cardigan pocket. Inside there was a cedar chest under the window, the kind you keep quilts in. She knelt and lifted the lid, and the hinge made a small dry sound. On top there was a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band gone brittle. My handwriting. All of it my handwriting. You wrote every month, she said. For 11 years. He threw them in the kitchen trash. I took them out after he went to bed. I picked up the top one. Kandahar postmark. The flap had been steamed and resealed. All of them had. You read them, I said. I said don't talk yet. Under the letters, there were the boxes. Small hinged ones, navy blue, the kind that come from a supply clerk with a ribbon folded inside. My Bronze Star. The second one. A commendation I'd mailed home, and my father had told me, on the phone, he'd put somewhere safe. He had. He'd put it here, in the dark, where no one who came for dinner would ever see it and ask. I set them down in a row on the carpet. My hands were steady. I noticed that and filed it away, the way I file wind. Then she handed me the folder. It was a plain manila folder, soft at the corners from handling. Inside were newspaper clippings and printouts, cut clean with scissors, dated in her small pencil script in the margins. A wire story about a ridge in Helmand. A veterans magazine, 3 years old, about an unnamed marksman on a program the writer wasn't allowed to name. A single line highlighted in yellow. They called the shooter only by a number. I started keeping these after Landstuhl, she said. You called me from the hospital and told me you'd fallen skiing. You've never skied in your life, Lucia. I'm your mother. I knew the shape of the lie. I didn't know the size of it. She pressed her lips together. I chose not to know the size of it. That's different. I want you to hear that it's different. The furnace clicked on somewhere below us. That was the only sound for a while. You could have told me the truth about him, I said. Not the classified part. The part where he called me a zero to his golf friends while you poured the wine. I know. You were in the room in Alexandria when he handed me the tray. I know. You handed me the corkscrew, Mom. She looked at her own hands then, the way you look at something that belongs to someone else. I told myself I was keeping the peace, she said. That's the sentence I used. For 33 years I kept the peace, and the peace was only ever quiet on his side of the table. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. One pass. Businesslike. Silence isn't neutral. I let myself believe it was. It cost you, and I let it. I didn't reach for her. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of this where the daughter kneels and holds her mother, and they both weep, and the room fills with light. I sat on the floor of a room I'd never been allowed into, surrounded by 11 years of my own returned handwriting, and I did not reach for her, because she had earned the truth more than she had earned comfort, and those are not the same debt. Why now? I said. Because they can't laugh at you anymore. The whole base knows. And I realized I'd been waiting for the world to make it safe for me to be on your side. Her voice cracked on the last word and held. That's the most cowardly thing I've ever said out loud. I wanted to say it anyway. Downstairs a car slowed.
Kept going.
Her eyes went to the window and came back. There's one more thing, she said. And once I give it to you, I can't take it back, so I need you to want it. She reached to the very bottom of the chest, under a folded quilt, and took out an envelope that had never been mailed. The paper was heavier than the others. Cream, not white.
No postmark. No stamp.
Just a name in the center in ink I would have known anywhere, the hard downstroke of a man who signed orders for a living. Lucia. He wrote it 2 years ago, she said. He's never sent it. I don't think he knows I have it. She held it out across the open chest. Read it or burn it. But it's yours now, not his. The envelope was heavier than a letter should be. I held it in both hands at the kitchen table while my mother stood by the window, not looking at me, running her thumb along the sill like she was checking for dust that wasn't there. I opened it with a butter knife. The paper inside was folded in thirds, 3 pages, my father's handwriting in blue ink that had gone slightly brown at the edges. The date at the top read 2 years ago, February. He'd written it and then buried it under 2 years of things he threw away. I read the first line twice. Lucia. There are things a man doesn't say out loud, so I am writing them where no one has to watch me do it. That was the whole man in one sentence. Even his apology needed privacy. Even his regret had to be done where no one could see his face. I kept reading. He wrote that he had known, for longer than he would admit, that I was good at what I did. He wrote that a colonel he trusted had once mentioned a shooter on a ridge, a woman who held for 9 hours and brought 8 men out. He wrote that the details had sat wrong in his chest for 6 years. He wrote the word proud. Then, 2 lines later, he took it back without taking it back. He wrote, "But you have to understand the position you put me in. Every dinner, every officer's wife asking what my daughter did, and I had nothing they could respect. So I told them logistics. It was easier to say than the truth." I set the page down flat on the table. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car door shut somewhere down the block. There it was in his own brown-blue ink. Not love. Position. He was sorry the way a man is sorry he backed into a mailbox. Inconvenienced, embarrassed, calculating the cost. Every near apology in those 3 pages had a "but" stapled to the back of it. I counted them out loud, my finger moving down the page.
1, 2,
3, 4. For times he almost said it. For times his pride reached out and pulled the words back into his mouth. My mother finally turned. "He wrote it right after his angiogram," she said. "He thought his heart was going. That's the only reason it exists." So it wasn't conscience. It was mortality. He'd only reached for me when he thought the ledger was closing. I folded the pages back into their thirds. I didn't cry. I'd cried in a cedar chest an hour ago, over the box she'd kept, my medals, my letters, the things she saved while he was busy telling colonels I filed paperwork. There wasn't more in me for 3 pages explaining why his shame was really my fault. Here is the thing I understood at that table with the butter knife still sitting on the placemat. For most of my life, I had been waiting for exactly this. A letter, an admission, some paper that said, "I see you now." I had built a small quiet room in my chest and kept it ready for the day he'd walk into it. And now the letter was here in my hands and the room was still empty, because an apology you hide in a drawer isn't an apology. It's a confession you make to yourself and file away so you never have to say it to the person you owe. "What are you going to do?" my mother asked. "I'm going to talk to him," I said.
Once.
In person. He'll say he's sorry. He already did. I tapped the folded letter. He set it to a drawer. "That doesn't count." She sat down across from me. Her hands were shaking, and I noticed for the first time how old they'd gotten. The knuckles thick, the rings loose. "Don't yell at him, Lucia. His heart." "I'm not going to yell." And I meant it. Forgiveness and permission are not the same word. I'd spent 33 years treating them like they were. Forgiving him meant I could set down the weight of hating him. Permission meant he got to keep doing it. I could do the first. I would not do the second. Not anymore. "Yelling is what you do when you still want something from someone," I told her. "I don't want anything from him. That's the whole difference. You can't beg a man who has nothing you need. I'm not going there to win. I'm going there to draw a line on the floor and tell him which side he stands on from now on." I thought about how I wanted it to go. Not his house. His house was his ground, his flags, his framed photographs of a family that never existed. Neutral ground. Somewhere with other people around, where a man like my father couldn't perform grief for an audience because the audience wouldn't care. A coffee shop.
Small. Public. Ordinary.
Somewhere the general held no rank. I took out my phone. My mother watched me. I typed the message slowly, and I read it 3 times before I let myself send it, because I knew that once he read it, the version of us that had lasted my whole life would be over, and whatever came next would have rules I'd written for the first time. I hit send. "I want to see you. Just the 2 of us. I have some things I need to say clearly." Then I set the phone face down on the table, and I waited for the 3 dots to start. The dots came, and then stopped, and then came again. Finally the reply, 1 word.
Fin.
And a time. Saturday, 10 in the morning, a place called Del Rio Coffee on the edge of Tampa, halfway between his hotel and my apartment. Neutral ground. I put the phone away and did not think about it again until Saturday. He was already there when I arrived. Corner table, back to the wall, the way he'd always sat, the way I sit now too. He'd ordered nothing. A general who once made a room of 200 officers go quiet was sitting in a coffee shop with his hands folded on an empty table, waiting for his daughter, and he looked smaller than the last man in line at a bus stop. I ordered a black coffee and a water and carried both to the table myself. No one poured for anyone. I noticed that. I let myself notice it. "You look well," he said. "I'm going to talk," I said. "You're going to let me finish. Then you can say whatever you want." His jaw moved. He nodded. I set the water down. The condensation had already ringed the wood. I put my hand flat next to it, the shoulder aching the way it does in air conditioning, the titanium reading the cold like it always will now. Landstuhl, Building 3. They rebuilt it after the ridge, and it never lets me forget the weather. "For 33 years, I said, you told people I was less than I am. You told your friends I did office logistics. You told them I backpacked Europe while I was downrange. You called me a zero in front of 200 officers in that auditorium, and some of them laughed, and I stood there in my own uniform and let it land, because I'd been letting it land my whole life." Lucia. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. "I didn't hide what I do from you because I was ashamed," I said. "I hid it because I took an oath, and the oath was worth more than your approval. That's the part you never understood. I finished top 4% at the academy. I held a clearance at 28 that you will never in your life be read into. I chose something bigger than you, and you decided that meant I chose against you." A chair scraped somewhere behind me, stone on tile, and I didn't flinch, and I used to flinch at everything. "Here's what changes today," I said. "You will never again lower my rank in front of anyone. You will never again take credit for a spine you spent 30 years trying to break. If someone asks about me, you say Major Nevis and nothing else, or you say nothing at all. Those are the terms." He looked at the table. "I did it for the family," he said. "The image of—" "There was no family image," I said. "There was you, and there was what you needed us to look like. Mom kept a cedar chest full of the letters you threw away. 11 years of them. She kept the medals you hid. She built the daughter you erased, in a locked room, in the dark, and she was too afraid of you to say so out loud." His hands came apart. I watched the knuckles. "I read your letter," I said. "The one from 2 years ago. The one you wrote after the heart scan and never sent. It had a but in every paragraph. I'm proud, but I was wrong, but a near apology in a drawer doesn't reach anyone, Dad. It just lets you feel like you tried." "I meant it," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "I did mean it. I believe you meant it in the drawer," I said. "That's not the same as meaning it to me." The espresso machine hissed, and someone laughed by the counter, an ordinary Saturday sound, and here was the strangest part. I felt no urge to raise my voice.
None.
I'd waited my whole life for a room like this, and I didn't need to burn it down. "I spent years trying to earn something from you," I said. "A phone call. One sentence. I made myself smaller so you'd have room to be proud of me, and you never used the room. So I stopped. I turned the water glass a quarter turn on its ring. I'm not here for your pride anymore. I don't need it. I'm already proud of me. I did the arithmetic without you a long time ago, and the number came out fine. It didn't come out 0. It never was 0. He was crying now, quietly, the way men his age cry, like they're trying to hide it from a room that already sees. "You spend your whole life setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm," I said, "and one morning you look down, and there's nothing left of you, and they've already gone inside. I'm done doing that. Not for you. Not for anyone." I finished my coffee. I stood. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "You can call. But the rules are different now, and I'm the one who wrote them." I walked around the table to leave. And that's when he stood up too. 62 years old, one hand on the chair back for balance, and he came to attention. Heels together. Spine straight. He brought his right hand up in a slow, clean salute. An officer of 3 stars saluting a major, a father saluting a daughter. The first time in my life he had ever done either. I held his eyes. I did not return it right away. I let him hold it, the arm trembling, the shop noise going on around us like nothing was breaking. Then I nodded once, and I walked out into the Tampa heat, and the door chimed behind me. 10 years from now, some young lieutenant would sit across from me the way I once sat across from him, carrying the same weight, and I would know exactly what to say. But that morning I only knew this much. The salute wasn't the end of anything. It was one man on one morning finally standing up. There were still years in front of us, a lot of them, and I already knew most of them would be hard. The promotion ceremony was held on a Thursday in March, in a hangar at Joint Base Andrews with the doors rolled halfway open. I was 43 now. 10 years is a long time to carry anything, and I had put most of it down. The folding chairs were set in rows on the concrete. Someone had run a red carpet down the center aisle that didn't quite reach the podium. I stood off to the side in my service dress, oak leaves still on my collar for another 11 minutes, and I watched people file in. My father came in slowly, on a cane, one hand on my mother's arm. Arthur was 72. The 3 stars had been gone from his life for a decade, and without them he had gotten smaller in a way that had nothing to do with the stoop in his spine. Diane guided him to the front row. He lowered himself into the aisle seat, folded both hands over the head of the cane, and looked at the empty podium like a man waiting to be sentenced. I hadn't asked him to come. I had left it open. That was the whole distance I'd traveled in 10 years, from a closed door to an open one I no longer stood guard at. Marcus Hale found me by the wall. He was 55 now, retired 2 years, grayer, and he still moved like the floor owed him money. "Ready?" he asked. "You remember what to do with the pins?" "I've been practicing on my wife's blazer." He almost smiled. "She's not thrilled. Here is the thing I need you to understand about the pinning. When you're promoted, you choose who fixes the new rank to your shoulders. Most people choose a parent. For 30 years, I had watched other officers hand that moment to their fathers, and I had done the math on what mine would say if I ever asked. I asked Marcus. I told him on the phone in January. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "You sure you don't want your dad?" "He can watch," I said. "You're the one who called my name in that room. You're the one who believed the number when nobody in my family ever bothered to check it. 8 men off that ridge. 9 hours. You knew who did that." The ceremony was short. The presiding general said the words. Then Marcus stepped up on one side, and my mother, not my father, stepped up on the other, and between them they took the oak leaves off and pinned the silver on.
Lieutenant-colonel.
Marcus's hands were steady. My mother's were not. I looked out over the rows once the pins were set. Arthur was crying. Not performing it, trying to stop it, his jaw working, one thumb pressed hard against the head of the cane. He caught my eye across 30 feet of concrete, and he did not look away, and he did not smile, and he did not mouth anything. He just held it. For once in his life, he let a thing be true on his face instead of managing it. I nodded to him. One nod. It was not forgiveness, and it was not a door. It was an acknowledgement that the man had come, that he had sat in the front row of a thing he used to lie about, and that he had finally learned to be quiet in a room where I was the reason people had gathered. That was enough. I had stopped needing it to be more than that years ago. Afterward there was cake in the corner and lukewarm coffee, and I found the person I'd actually been watching for all afternoon. Second Lieutenant Emily Cho was 24, standing alone by the coffee urn, holding her cup with both hands the way you hold something when you don't know what else to do with your fingers. I'd met her 3 weeks earlier. Her father was a federal judge who had wanted a third-generation lawyer and had gotten a fighter pilot instead, and I knew the shape of her shoulders because I had worn it. "He didn't come," she said. It wasn't a question.
"No."
He said flying is a phase. He said he'll take me seriously when I'm done playing. I set my coffee down on the table. "Lieutenant, can I tell you the only thing I know for sure?" She looked up. "You're going to spend a long time waiting for one particular person to see you correctly. And the whole time you're waiting, you'll be tempted to shrink down to the size of the room they've made for you." I touched the new silver on my shoulder. "Don't. The number they assign you was never the real number. You do not have to burn yourself down to keep somebody else warm." Her eyes went bright, and she blinked it back, hard, the way we all learned to. "Did it get better?" she asked. "With your dad?" I thought about the front row, the cane, the nod. "It got honest," I said. "That's a different thing. Better than better." Across the hangar, my father was still in his chair, my mother beside him, and the light through the half-open door was going gold. I picked my coffee back up. "Come on," I told Emily. "Let me introduce you to the man who once called my name in a room full of people who thought they knew who I was." I walked her toward Marcus, and that is where I'll leave us. The young one and the old ones, and me in the middle, no longer waiting for anyone's permission to stand up straight.